Come to order as the State Judiciary Committee. Today's date's March 14th, 2017. Didn't I say that right?
Judiciary and Public Safety.
Oh, and Public Safety Committee. Thank you very much. We're going to start out today with Senator Ingebretson, actually Senator Limmer's bill that Senator Ingebretson will be presenting because Senator Limmer is still not feeling well. Senate File 1099, Senator Ingebretson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And what you said to start it out with sounded just perfect to me, actually.
Thank you very much.
Sounded exactly
Thank
right.
you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members. As the chairman mentioned, I'm standing in for Senator Limmer for Senate File and to introduce Senate File number 1099. Members, it's the applicability of pistol permit law for peace officers. Now, that's a word that it was a little tough for me, but Senate File 1099 amends the pistol permit law to clarify that an owner and operator of a private establishment may not prohibit peace officers from carrying under the provisional law that allows these establishments to prohibit carry by posted notice. This has the effect of clarifying that off-duty officers may carry within private establishments even if the owner objects. The bill essentially overrides the holding of a 2015 unpublished Court of Appeals decision. A couple other points I'd like to make, Mr. Chair and members. In 2005, the legislature passed the Personal Protection Act. The second thing is there was a great debate about Second Amendment rights versus the private owner, property owners. I believe it was the longest House floor debate ever. There was a compromise. Private party owners of property open to the public, stores, restaurants, theaters, sports arenas, etc., were deprived from the traditional use of the trespass law to deny entrance or remove people from their establishment for lawful possession. And we're talking lawful possession. A new and exclusive remedy was created for owners wishing to bar lawful carriers. This was the only means by which a private establishment owner can ban lawful carriers, and the statute explicitly states that it cannot be used against current peace officers on or off duty. Recently, some confusion has arisen over the application of this act to peace officers, and Senate File 1099 will clarify this and reaffirm the compromise of 2005. Members, I have Dennis Flaherty with me today. He is the Executive Director of the Minnesota Peace and Police Officers Association, and he'll be furthering explain the bill.
Mr. Flaherty, welcome to the committee.
Thank you, Mr.
Proceed.
Chair. And for the record, my name is Dennis Flaherty. I'm Executive Director of the Minnesota Police and Peace Officers Association, representing about 8,500 active licensed police officers throughout the state, working at all levels, city, county, and the state itself. Senate File 1099 is designed to prevent the disarming of off-duty Minnesota licensed peace officers. It only applies to actively licensed peace officers. There has been some recent confusion about the application of the Personal Protection Act to peace officers, and we are seeing sporting and entertainment venues preventing off-duty officers from entering public facilities while in possession of their firearms. Most officers carry a firearm at all times. They understand and fully expect to intervene or respond whenever they witness a crime in progress or see a person in need of protection. They cannot do so without their firearm. I need only call your attention to the lone wolf terrorist in the St. Cloud Mall. If this attacker had not been encountered by the trained, armed, off-duty police officer who was capable of confronting him, the attacker would certainly have harmed or killed many more people. Cops make arrests, they stop crime and protect citizens frequently all across the state while they are off duty. Citizens expect them to take action in these situations, and they would definitely support this needed clarification in our law. Officers also come across people that they may have previously arrested or jailed. They need to protect themselves. The boldness of individuals and their willingness to confront cops on or off duty has increased. Lone acts of terrorism are increasing across the country, and we need cops to be able to respond immediately and do what they are best trained to do, and do it proficiently. This bill is absolutely necessary so that our officers are not disarmed and that they're able to protect the public and themselves. And I would stand for any questions that you may have.
Members, any questions for Mr. Flaherty? Hearing none at this time, do we have other members of the public or groups that would like to speak in favor or against the bill? Hearing none, members. Senator Latz.
Mr. Chairman, this is a very broadly written bill. So I'm trying to understand, first of all, I haven't read the Court of Appeals decision. But I'm trying to understand how this would apply to, for example, a privately owned daycare or other facilities that are similar to that. And secondly, how would it apply to a venue where there is already security screening and other armed security present?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Latz,
Mr. Flaherty.
I didn't hear the first part of your question, but the second part, a lot of entertainment venues or sporting venues now do have metal detectors, and and an officer would need to go through that, an off-duty officer. He typically would identify himself through his credentials and indicate that he was armed, and then would logically proceed to be admitted. That's what the intent of this bill is, to ensure that that happens.
Senator Latz.
Mr. Chairman, so would that apply to all venues then? You know, where you have large events, tens of thousands of people that have other separate elaborate security procedures set up? And what kind of screening or other process does a person, an off-duty officer carrying a firearm, go through in order to assure the venue operators that that officer is not for some reason suspended or under investigation or subject to any other reviews relating to their ability to carry
Mr. Flaherty.
Mr.
or
Chairman,
act as a police officer for that matter?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Latz, if a person is no longer an active peace officer, if he has been suspended, he or she would not have police credentials and would not have authorization to carry a firearm. So they would, in essence, be committing a crime in and of itself. What we're talking about is active licensed peace officers. And I think did you ask about training?
Yeah, Mr.
Senator
Chairman, Mr. Flaherty, I'm asking in particular in a large venue where there is already an active and rehearsed security operation. How would this fit in if there's a person who is unknown to the operators of the security system? You got a person carrying, presumably no one except those who are part of the pre-authorized security apparatus, and under this bill, active licensed police officers would be carrying inside such a facility. So how is the security operation supposed to know if a particular person if an incident is occurring? If they're a police officer and they're authorized to be carrying, if there's a split-second decision being made, how does that interact with a pre-rehearsed and trained security operation?
Mr. Flaherty.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Latz, in most of these venues, the strength of the security are private security guards that are not armed. They are supplemented in some venues by on-duty licensed peace officers or off-duty, working off-duty, but nevertheless active licensed peace officers. And there would be no conflict because we are again talking about active licensed peace officers trained and proficient in the use of firearms, and more importantly, when to use them and when not to use them. And so they would actually be in a better position than perhaps the private security guards. They are better trained and better prepared to handle something. But, you know, also, Senator, part of this is that they carry them for self-protection as well. And so, I mean, I think you have two issues here. And these are not retired officers. These are active employed officers that are trained extensively. And I know you're very well versed on our training and our use of force and deadly force, and because Minnesota certainly leads the way in those areas. And so I can't see where there would be a conflict at all.
Mr. Chairman?
Senator Latz?
I mean, I have a great deal of respect for the job that the police officers do and the training that they receive, but I'm concerned about the presence of a firearm where there's an already armed security operation, not just private security that may carry mace or something, but an armed security operation where there are on-duty police officers or off-duty police officers in uniform that are paid as part of the security operation, that are trained how to react in specific incidents that are characteristic of that particular kind of venue. If they see someone who's an off-duty officer with a firearm on them, but they don't know it's an off-duty officer, they may think it's someone who managed to get past security with a firearm. I mean, isn't there some risk involved there? And does the peace officer training include reacting to incidents in some of these unique kind of venues like a large sporting arena?
Mr. Flaherty.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Latz, actually there is training in just that very area. And that conflict that you suggest, whether it's at a large venue or a small venue, that can exist at any time, whether it could be plainclothes officers working that rather than an off-duty peace officer. So officers would know how to handle that and would be able to deconflict and would and certainly isn't going to intervene in a situation unless their identity can be established and that they can do so in a safe and prudent manner.
Senator Schoen.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. And Mr. Flaherty, I was going to just touch on this. I spent 4.5 years working undercover and didn't put on a uniform for that entire time. And now I don't necessarily always look like, because I know you don't always approve of my beard when I'm not working the street. But can you, or maybe Mr. Titus or Mr. Kroll, talk about some of the training that we would do for off-duty and maybe give a very short description if they're interested in, I know we actually covered for our off-duty shoots on how to react and about stress inoculation. When you talk about the large venues, the large amounts of people, and I don't recommend that everybody in the world comes to the Mall of America with a gun, but I trust cops there with it because we actually do train in those very stressful, large number of people environments to actually be accountable for what's happening in our immediate area. But maybe that might be beneficial if you could give us a short briefing on that.
Chief, if you'd give your full name.
Mr. Chair, Senator Schoen, thanks for the promotion, but I'm Lieutenant, not Chief. Bob Kroll, I'm President of the Police Officers Federation of Minneapolis. I represent about 900 of our cops, and like you, Senator Schoen, I worked undercover in Vice, only I was too young to grow a beard at the time. But I'm a native of St. Paul, and Denny covered a lot of what happens at these venues. Just to expand a little bit, I've been a season ticket holder for the Minnesota Wild since we got the team. I'm a Minneapolis cop. I come in, I check in, I show them my police ID. They know where I'm seated, and in I go. And that's it. You check in, and if you're on suspension or you're fired or something like that, you don't have your ID, you don't have your gun to be there to begin with. But to your question directly, Senator Schoen, the training, we receive on-duty and off-duty survival, and on-duty applies to undercover officers. The idea of being undercover is you don't take action. You don't take police action unless absolutely necessary in life or death situation. You're a great witness, and you maintain your undercover capacity. The same carries over when you're off-duty at a venue like this. The only time you would ever be inclined to draw your firearm is to stop immediate life or death situation. That is the only time. Otherwise, you're there. You're a witness. You're checked in. They know. You're checked in with the venue, whether it's armed security, private security. There's checks and balances, but some of the concern, this is a national issue in some cases, and some of the concern goes blue-on-blue crime, things like that. But when you look at Minnesota, we have the highest training standards, the highest standards for licensing is anywhere in the country, and that's been through my entire career of 28 years. We are so far in advanced in training by comparison to some other states where they've had any types of issues like this. It just sets us apart. Off-duty, you are nothing but a witness. If you're armed, you will report that to the officers. You let on-duty security handle the issue first, if they're able. You let on-duty officers at the venue handle the issue if they're able. The only time you would ever dream of intervening is if it's to preserve life.
Thank you,
And
Lieutenant
we
Crowe.
do receive extensive training initially and as a part of our in-service training.
Thank you. Any more questions, members? Senator Latz. Oh, I'm sorry. Senator Pappas.
Mr. Chairman, and I was a few minutes late, so I apologize, because I don't see this in the language, and maybe it's the section that's not before us. But it seems to me that the dangerous thing is if someone is carrying a gun and the security people in the venue, I'm mostly concerned about large venues, don't know that you're there and that you are a off-duty police officer, and as Senator Latz said, thinks that somebody got past security somehow. And so how do you prevent that from happening? Is there a requirement that you have to register with the venue, with the security people, let them know where you're seated, and that you are bringing in a gun? I don't know if that's currently the practice or if that's a proposal in this bill or not.
Lieutenant Crowe.
Mr. Chair, Senator Pappas, I can only speak to the venues that I've been through, and it's venue specific. For example, we're at the Minnesota Wild, where I go to all the games, there's metal detectors. So you walk through, I can't walk through, it's going to be an alert. I identify myself, well, they know me now from being there forever, but I identify myself with my ID to the security working the metal detectors. They call an on-duty police officer over. I show him my ID and my ticket stub so he knows where I'm at. Same thing at Target Field and Target Center. You cannot go through with being armed in most of wherever there's metal detectors, you're identified. Otherwise, the other venues, there's a process for checking in if you're armed.
Senator Latz, did you have something?
Yeah, thank you, Lieutenant Kroll. If you could elaborate for me, what does the process for checking in mean? I mean, do they get your name? Do they identify a badge number, police force, seating location, those kind of things?
Lieutenant Crowe.
Mr. Chair, Senator Latz, at the XL, for example, I walk in, I've got my police ID. They take a photo of it with their smartphone or their cell phone, and my ticket stub. It's got my name, rank, agency, seat location. That's at the XL, where I'm familiar with going on a regular basis.
All right, the other question that I had, I know Mr. Flaherty said he didn't hear the first part of my first question, but it had to do with, for example, daycare centers. If a if a daycare center, privately owned establishment, would they, under this language, be required to allow an off-duty armed police officer to enter their establishment?
Mr. Backus, could you shed some light on that?
Mr. Chair, members, I'd point out that the bill before you deals with the permit to carry law. There are other provisions in state law where a person can't have a weapon. So, for example, a daycare would be under the prohibition on school property law. So if there's a prohibition elsewhere in law, this specific thing would not apply, and the other provision would apply.
Senator Pappas.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I guess I didn't quite get enough clarity. So, Officer Lieutenant Crow, is it? Gross. You mentioned venue-specific protocol, but under this law, could each venue, what would each venue do then if this became law? Would they still be able to require you to check in with them and, identify where you're seated and show your ID and everything that they're doing under current practice?
Mr. Chair, Senator Pappas, we're not asking anything we're talking about large-scale venues, but this is everything from walking into a coffee shop that says we ban guns here.
Mm-hmm.
This applies to everywhere, and our officers, when they're in the city of Minneapolis, are expected to, be working if they're there. This applies to everywhere, and we're focusing on large venues. We mentioned the daycare center, but the protocol, it would be up to the venue. It would be up to the venue on what they wanted you to do. I mean, some places, they don't care. They just simply let you in. That's commonplace. The larger scale ones where they have metal detectors, obviously that's where they have an issue, and that's where you go through the identification process.
Mr. Chairman and Mr. Flaherty, where does it say, or I understand Senator Limmer isn't here, where does it actually say in the language that the venue, whatever scale it is, you could say large-scale venue, can impose some registration requirements on off-duty officers?
Mr. Chair.
Mr. Flaherty.
Senator Pappas, it does not. It does not, but as Lieutenant Kroll pointed out, some of the complexes have developed policies on how they're going to do this. Maybe it's a special door there to go to or a special, that's certainly up to the venue, and the officer certainly would comply with that.
Senator Pappas.
Mr. Chairman, I'm just trying to get to the point that if we pass this law, that's what's happening currently. If we pass this law, would they still be able to do that? And it doesn't appear to be, to me, that's clear in here that they could still impose a registration requirement. Because to me, that's kind of significant here, is you don't want the security people to not know that this person is a licensed police officer that's trained and is off duty and is carrying. They could think it's just some average person, and if there's an emergency situation, they're not part of the security team, and I'm afraid that there could be unintentional injuries that could happen. So maybe that's something we could think about, is to allow that, the venue, whatever it is, and however you want to define it. It seems to be a flaw in this bill. If you're interested in keeping that current system in place that you have at the Excel or at the target field.
Senator Schoen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Maybe Senator Ingebretson, as a co-author on the bill, maybe some clarity around this. Is the bill directly pointed at making sure that licensed active peace officers in the state of Minnesota can carry off-duty into venues that are now trying to restrict them?
That's correct.
Mr. Chair?
Chair.
Who said that?
I'm sorry, Mr. Chair.
Yeah,
That's
Senator
correct.
Ingebretson.
Mr. Chair and Senator
Senator
Ingebretson, do we or you have any intent to limit the Xcel Energy Center or any other venue on how they, are you looking to guide them on check-in, or is the check-in process silent because whatever they decide to do is fine with those of us in law enforcement? We would just assume that they carry on with whatever works for them? Or is it that do you have any intent to create a process that would be guided in state law? Or is it your intent to just leave it as is, whatever their request is?
No, Mr. Chair.
Senator Ingebretson.
No, that would not be my intent.
So, Mr. Chair and Senator Ingebretson, your
Senator
intent is just to leave as is, but to make sure that off-duty, full-time or licensed active peace officers not under penalty or suspension would be able to carry their firearm as normal off-duty.
Senator Ingebretson.
Mr. Chair, Senator Sloan, you're right. And if the Excel Center has a good working relationship with their local law enforcement, as it sounds like it is, I think that would be a real positive, especially for the public that's there. You know, I can really get off into the weeds with this, but I don't think I have to. There's never been a problem, at least not that I'm aware of, where anything has ever happened. But if I'm the public there, knowing that there may be somebody there off duty with a weapon that's there to help me if I run into trouble, and I go back to the St. Cloud incident, where they may have even had on the door, you can't carry a weapon. I'm not sure if they did, but thank goodness there was somebody there that was a responsible gun owner that actually stopped a terrible tragedy from happening. I would feel better as a public going there from that day forward that this is possible. So, but no, that's not my intent.
Senator Ingebretson, I have a question. The question we just talked about, the policies that a large venue would have to check in a police officer. What happens if those policies become what I would call unreasonable, which would be something like, you know, I know this seems extreme, but what if they decide to make a policy that would take a long time? I need a background check from you before I can allow you to come in. What happens there?
Well, I guess,
Any ideas?
Mr. Chair, I can certainly have Mr. Flaherty answer that, but I can't imagine that happening. But this law here would restrict them from doing that. I mean, if you're there as a licensed peace officer, active peace officer, and you carry that license in your wallet, that means that you've met the qualifications of carrying a handgun in a proficient fashion to be able to carry out the functions of law enforcement. I can't imagine that happening.
Senator
but if it
Ingebretson,
does-
I'm just saying if they become unreasonable, it feels a little bit like a loophole here that they could say, yes, this is our procedure. You come to this door, we check you, we take a picture of it, and all of a sudden they say, but we need a background check now. And that to me is unreasonable because you have a license. I just wonder, you know, have we got this thing solid enough where they're going to allow you in?
Mr. Chair, I guess would have Mr. Backus look at that, but this would prohibit any of that type of activity.
Okay. Senators? Senator Latz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The way I'm reading the bill, a peace officer who is lawfully carrying their firearm, theoretically, under the statute, could refuse to provide proof of identification or that they're an active duty peace officer, that they could refuse to allow their ID to be taken a picture of, could refuse all of what reasonable or unreasonable requirements because the statute simply says, or the proposed language simply says that private establishment may not prohibit the lawful carry or possession of firearms by a peace officer. I mean, it does. So theoretically, a peace officer could say, I don't have to submit to any of your requirements of this establishment. Statute says you have to let me in. So where in the language of the statute does it authorize a venue, a large sporting arena, for example, with tens of thousands of people, Excel, for example, the hockey game. If, let's say you decide, Lieutenant Kroll, that you want to go in the game and you don't have your ID with you that day, you've left it in the car, or you forgot it at home, you could cite the statute and say to Excel, you got to let me in anyway, because that's what the statute mandates. I don't have to show you or prove to you anything.
Mr. Chair.
Mr. Flaherty.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Senator Latz, I would suggest that if Lieutenant Kroll took that attitude and refused to identify himself, he would be taken into custody by the security people and the police that work Excel. I mean, I can't imagine an officer not readily identifying themselves. That's why they're given police credentials, and I just can't imagine an officer that would refuse to identify themselves. They've already voluntarily said, before going through the metal detector, look, I'm a police officer, and here you go. And they readily identify themselves. Now, if Excel or whoever wants to take pictures of their ticket and what have you, that's fine. But the scenario you described just, I mean, they would be taken into custody, and I'm sure that they would be subject to disciplinary action by their department, et cetera.
So, Mr. Chairman,
Senator Latz.
you know, that may happen, Mr. Flaherty, but the statute doesn't allow it. So theoretically, taking them into custody would violate the statute, and Lieutenant Kroll, or whoever the officer is, could then sue the venue for violating their rights under this statute. What I'm trying to find is some statutory language that leaves room for a venue to impose reasonable requirements to make sure that, in fact, the person presenting him or herself as a peace officer is, in fact, a peace officer. The other thing I'm concerned about is, a fake ID. I mean, anyone who's a terrorist or interested in inflicting severe harm, theoretically anyway, they could put together a fake identification and show that to the security guard at the entrance to Excel, and how is Excel supposed to know one way or the other? I mean, I'm trying to find some reasonable language here that accommodates the desire of peace officers to be able to attend these games and not disarm, but still give the venue the ability to verify that, in fact, they are who they say they are, and to take reasonable steps to assure that there isn't going to be a mishap because they don't know who it is or where they are in the building.
Mr. Chair, Senator Latz.
Lieutenant Kroll.
Back to the identification one, if you would refuse, me as being the Federation president that represent our officers in internal investigations and things like that of a frequent nature, I would strongly advise my members against it. We are required, even in full uniform, if someone asks for our identification on duty, to take it out, to show it to them, to give them your business card with your name and your badge number. For them to not do that off duty is absurd. They would not. They would be in a lot of trouble internally by doing that. It is a violation of policy on duty, off duty. If you're going to present yourself as an officer off duty, you better be prepared to give your identification and your business card while doing that. In the second instance, when we identify ourselves in these places, it is the on-duty law enforcement agency that comes to admit us, and we are trained in identifying false identifications. So part of the duty is to look at ID cards, and if there's a question, verify the ID card they're holding with the driver's license or identification card. We're all required to have driver's license in the state also. So if there's any doubt in the officer's mind on duty working the venue, compare the identification card with the driver's license. And our officers would be trained to be in full compliance with this.
Senator Pappas?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Lieutenant Kroll. I think what you're talking about is best practice, but I mean, it's our job to think of the worst case scenario and to make sure that the law is clear and is aligned with what you're calling best practice. And although the metal detectors do give me comfort, there are venues, like I don't believe the St. Paul Saints ballpark has metal detectors. There are large venues, the Mall of America doesn't have metal detectors, to my knowledge, that don't have metal detectors. And it just seems to me to make sense, it's a little extra step to, check in with the security at the venue so that there's no misunderstandings that can occur.
Mr. Chair.
Senator Ingebretson.
Mr. Chair, to that point, and I think we may be getting off the issue here, but the Vikings have been around. Let's use the Vikings for an example. They've been around since the early '60s, and not once has there been an incident happen like you're talking about. Not once has it been where the cops are the issue. So let's stay focused on public safety, I think, when we would move forward here. And I understand the being in plain clothes being an issue with the weapon. I get that, I understand that, but it's never been the problem. That has never been the problem. What the problem has been is somebody that has snuck by, and quite frankly, not that long ago, with an awful lot of things at the new stadium. I mean, there was some stuff that was actually brought in there that was banners and whatnot that were brought in there. You're not going to hurt too many people with banners, don't get me wrong, but we're not talking apples to apples, I guess. But that was not a police problem. That was more of an internal security problem as to how they got that air. So we can come up with lots of hypotheticals. I can think of a real situation where I come from, standing at the counter, and all of a sudden somebody comes in with a gun, and I'm off duty, and somebody comes in with a gun and says, I want cash out of the cash register, and they're going to look over at me and they're going to say, well, Sheriff, what are you going to do? What are you going to do about that? You know, if I chose to carry a gun, I could probably stop something like that or protect somebody from getting hurt. Not so much in the metro, I suppose, because they don't know their officers as well as they do out there. Daycare was another example, Senator Latz. I would feel some more comfort if I knew that I had one of the local policemen going there, dropping their child off and picking them up on or off duty. In fact, in uniform sometimes, maybe bringing them there and picking them up off duty. I would feel much more comfortable with knowing that there's a presence of somebody that was there that could protect if there were to be something like that. So,
Members, as we wrap things up, any last? Yes, Senator Latz.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I respect that, Senator Ingebrigtsen, and I respect the role that our officers play on and off duty in our community's security. I'm a little bit nervous about, an officer from a small venue in greater Minnesota that may not be trained in large venue responses. May not have as much training as, say, the Minneapolis Police Force has, because they've got quite a few large venues in Minneapolis. I'm a little bit worried about people who are not of goodwill, who are imposters, trying to present themselves as licensed peace officers, who are in fact not. I mean, there's a separate crime on the books for impersonating an officer. We have cases where people do that, where they put sirens on their car and pull people over. I mean, we've all seen the news stories on occasion when that happens too. And that's not to besmirch any, truly active duty licensed peace officer at all, but it is a security concern for those whose job it is to protect the security of the people who are entering their venue. Listening to this discussion, I've asked council to draft up some language that I think gets at the goal and the purpose of the proponents of the legislation, but also gives the owners of private establishments some tools to protect the people in those establishments without unduly burdening the peace officers that are also seeking entry for lawful purposes. So I wonder if, Mr. Chairman, if I could ask council to read language that I will propose as an amendment.
Mr. Backus.
Mr. Chair and members, the amendment would be on line 2.10 after the period. Insert a new sentence. However, the owner or operator may require a peace officer to submit identification that reliably demonstrates that the person is a licensed peace officer in good standing, and to register with the establishment the person's name, badge number, rank, agency, and if the establishment has a seating plan, the location where the person will be seated, period.
Mr. Chairman?
Senator Latz.
I think to put the appropriate conclusion to this, we'd probably have to add something to the effect that If the person seeking entry fails to do so, then the owner or operator of the private establishment may deny entry. Otherwise, or at least with the firearm, right, may deny entry with the firearm.
Okay.
Otherwise, just saying they can do this, but without giving them the power to deny the entry, it's of no consequence.
Okay, are you moving this?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I move that amendment.
Okay. If we could have that one more time, and then Senator Ingebretson, I'd like to hear a response from you. Mr. Backus.
Mr. Chair, members, page 2, line 10, after the period, insert, however, the owner or operator may require a peace officer to submit identification that reliably demonstrates that the person is a licensed peace officer in good standing, and to register with the establishment the person's name, badge number, rank, agency, and if the establishment has a seating plan, the location where the person will be seated. And if the officer fails to provide this, the owner or operator may deny the officer entry with the firearm.
I'm sorry, what was the last couple words? With what?
Mr. Chair, remember, I was kind of making that up as I went. So and if the officer fails to provide that information, the establishment may deny the officer entry with the firearm.
Senator Ingebretson.
Mr. Chair, that's quite a lengthy amendment. I think I'm fine with the first part if that's their business model. I think we've even talked about it being part of the business model of the Excel Center, that they require that. But I think it becomes, basically stifles the whole bill, the whole idea of the bill, I think, if you're going to move any further than that. If it's in their business plan, I don't think any officer in the state of Minnesota would object to that. But anything further, and if you could repeat the last half of the sentence, Mr. Backus.
Mr. Backus.
Mr. Chair and members, and if the officer fails to provide this, the establishment may deny the officer entry with the firearm.
Senator Ingebretson.
And Mr. Chair, I think that might be somewhat redundant, because I think they can already refuse entry if they're not complied with. So I would just say that in talking with the author before coming here, that I think it's pretty clear what we're trying to do here. So I would ask that the members vote against this amendment and we move forward with the bill, the existing bill, the way it is. I don't see anything at all.
Senator Rolfe. No? Okay. Senator Latz to the amendment.
Yeah, to the amendment. Mr. Chairman, what the amendment does is it puts into the statute precisely the practice which was described by Lieutenant Kroll in Excel for wild games, and which may well be the appropriate practice, but I don't think under the statute that's proposed by the bill here that Excel would have any right to deny entry if Lieutenant Kroll failed to comply with those requirements, because there's absolutely nothing in the bill that's drafted that says that the proof of the fact that a person's a peace officer must be adequately established. It simply flat out says there's a prohibition on allowing someone who's a licensed peace officer to enter, or a prohibition on denying them entry with their firearm. So that's a flat out right that the peace officer has, is to enter any establishment with their firearm. It doesn't say anything at all about grounds on which they may be denied entry. And it may be Excel's practice to do this, but Lieutenant Kroll could say, I'm not going to comply with this, I'm going to walk in the door. Now, that may be highly unusual for that to happen. And he may face discipline back at his home agency as a result of it. or by the post board, or by whomever. But I think these are reasonable practices which the venue has to have the opportunity to gather information so that you don't end up with errors or mistaken identity or anything like that. So the security for the facility knows where Lieutenant Kroll or whoever the officer is sitting, and can be aware that there's an armed but perhaps not uniformed peace officer present in the stands in this general location. And if someone refuses to comply with these requirements, let's say it's an imposter. Let's say it's someone who wants to commit terror in the U.S. Bank Stadium, and they show up in a police uniform, and they've got a fake ID. The way the bill is drafted, U.S. Bank could not deny them entry. Or they'd be hard-pressed to deny them entry unless they can somehow prove that they aren't a peace officer. I mean, I don't want to get too far afield here, but, I mean, we look around the world, and, you know, we're concerned about, terrorist acts in the St. Cloud Mall. You look around the world, and you got people who are showing up to commit terrorist acts who are dressed as in the same military uniforms as the military that they're coming to attack, to fool everyone into thinking that they're legitimately and safely there. So if someone wanted to commit a terrorist act at U.S. Bank Stadium, it seems to me they would try to obtain a Minneapolis police officer's uniform and a fake ID and try to gain entry with a firearm. So you've got to at least give the venue the tools to lawfully say, we're going to deny you entry if you aren't at least willing to provide some minimal identifying information so we're satisfied that you can lawfully enter the venue. And that's all the amendment does, is basically puts into statute the legal authorization for what has been described as the practice at Excel and I presume other venues if they feel it's necessary to protect their public who's there.
Senator Schoen.
Thank you, Mr.
Do the
Chair.
amendment, please.
Yes, and Senator Latz, I think the one problem with the amendment talking about the seating chart specifically is what about the Home and Garden Show or something along that lines? I mean, that's you're not assigned seating, or the Renaissance Festival or something else like that where it's you're mobile. The one thing I will say is, if you wanted to put in something about having, being able to request an identification card, we're going to carry them all the time. That's actually pretty much, I know my department policy is to have that with if I'm carrying off duty. But the other part too is I would add actually, I might know if there was a verification procedure that I might know Lieutenant Kroll, and without needing a phone call to my department, he can go, yeah, I know Dan. And that's okay in that realm too. So if you're known by an officer with your ID, if that was the verification process, I think that's acceptable. But I think the rest of it actually does get a little too prescriptive, because if there is no seating chart or anything like that, that becomes difficult to enforce. So I understand the direction you're going, although I don't think that trying to request anybody to maintain something in statute or develop a plan through statute right here today is the right way to do it. If something's working at Excel that seems to be working just fine, if U.S. Bank, if we're worried about terror attacks or under the guise of wearing a uniform, for instance, the Secret Service certifies all folks before an event, and I'm sure the NFL can do that same thing with their officers, and whether it's through an insignia that they put on their uniforms, a specific pin that shows that you're pre-checked, that changes for every game, or it's a different color. There are many different things that I think they could work through and do just fine. So, I mean, I'm good with saying that you have to present the identification personally. I think the seating part is probably just a little bit too much.
Members, we have another bill after this. I'm concerned about the time. We will take a vote on the other bill by 2:30, and so we're kind of using up some of our time. So let's move on this amendment. It's been moved by Senator Latz. We've heard the verbal description. All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed?
No.
No. The noes have it. Moving forward, Any other questions, members?
Mr. Chairman,
Okay, yes, Senator Latz.
I was prepared to support the bill if it had the amendment on it. But the way the bill is written, it doesn't provide any venue, any reasonable way, any way to deny entry to an active licensed peace officer under any circumstances whatsoever. And not even with the protections that Lieutenant Kroll described as happen at Excel. And without even giving the venue the opportunity to ask for an ID, then this is just really poorly written as an addition to state statute, because it doesn't provide any way to work around it, even with reasonable and unburdensome requirements, however you wanted to end up defining them. If a venue, the amendment had, if a venue doesn't have a seating area, it doesn't apply. That component doesn't apply. But if we can't give any grounds for a venue to say, we can't deny you, even if we don't know who you are actually, if we don't take the picture, the whole bit, we just have to let you in because of your status. Seems to me, just as a drafting matter, as an addition to state statute, that's a very poor way to write statutes. And unfortunately, it opens up the door for mischief among the 0.1% of those who, maybe you got an active duty licensed officer who's, had a big fight at home or something and is really upset about something and may not be the best person to be walking around with a firearm at that moment. But in any event, I was going to vote for the bill if that amendment went on, but without it, with all due respect to the proponents and to the peace officers who safely and lawfully protect us every day in community events, the way this is drafted, I just can't support it.
Senator Pappas.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It does concern me that, and I've heard this in other committees, that as well, and the majority does seem to be rushing bills through without having enough vetting. And I did think that Senator Latz and Senator Schoen were really working on some potential amendments to the amendment that could have eliminated maybe some of the requirements, but still met, my goal of making sure that the security team knows who's got, who's armed in the venue. So I'm kind of disappointed that we couldn't, in the minority, we couldn't offer a reasonable amendment and have that accepted by the majority in kind of a bipartisan spirit. Because I came to this hearing thinking that, no, I thought this was a really bad idea. I became convinced through the testimony that it was a reasonable idea with some protocol in place, as Senator Kroll described. But to not put that protocol in statute, as I said, the best practice, I think is unfortunate. It's an error on the part of the committee. And it is our job to imagine the unthinkable and imagine the impossible that could happen and has happened in other parts of the country and other parts of the world. And you have a lot of highly paid security people that are very concerned about this legislation and what it's going to mean for their venue. So I, too, will be voting against the bill.
Senator Ingebrigtsen, before you move this bill, I want to take one exception to Mr. Flaherty's beginning statement. Mr. Flaherty, you said something about the public expects cops to respond. I don't think we expect them, but we highly appreciate it when they do respond. And so with that, Senator Ingebrigtsen, if you would move your bill, we can move forward.
Mr. Chair, I move Senate File 1099 to pass and be moved right to the floor.
Members, Senate Bill 1099 is been asked to move forward and pass. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The ayes have it. Thank you, Senator Ingebrigtsen and testifiers.